So let us continue talking about general guidelines. In this case, I will be demonstrating how to determine um, the launching of PySpark so that you can actually come up with the solution. And it is applicable for any certification you are trying to give. Most likely, they will give you remote desktop on which there will be terminal, Sublime Text, etc. And once you launch terminal and once you start running commands like PySpark for Python, Spark, Python plus Spark or Spark Shell, you should be able to come up with the solution. But before coming up with the solution, you should know how to launch PySpark or Spark Shell itself. As part of this topic, let us see how to launch PySpark. What is the criteria you should consider? Before getting into the details, most of the demonstrations I will be giving will be on the big data labs, which I have. Most of the datasets I have already provided you in the GitHub, but there are certain datasets which are quite big and which I cannot provide you in GitHub. One of those datasets is crime data. So make sure you go to Google and search for Chicago crime data and hit enter. And then you will get to this link. And you can see that there are datasets that are available which for the download. You can click on download, you can click on CSV. If my problem statement says CSV, you can click on JSON if my problem statement says JSON. So if you are using your own environment, you have to download this. And as per the problem statement, you have to upload to HDFS because you are supposed to read the data from HDFS. And you have to make necessary changes for these paths. Only then it will work. So in my case, this is the path in which I have already uploaded the data which I have downloaded from this location. So let us see the properties first, because properties of the file, especially the size first, because that actually determines how to launch the Spark Shell or PySpark. That being said, to get the details about the size, you have to connect to the lab. Here I have already connected. If you are new to this, go back and check the videos where I have covered using big data labs for the certification courses. And then make sure you have active account and get into the lab if you want environment for practice. And then you can actually run this command which you have given as part of the problem statement. The command is Hadoop fs-ls-h and the path fs-ls-h for human readable format, and the path is public crime CSV. Okay. Once you get this information, you can see that data is of 1.4 GB. And it can be of any size as part of the certification, but you can extract the information here. And based on this, and also based on the cluster capacity, which we'll be seeing in a moment, you will be able to determine how much capacity should be given. Okay. And that you can go to something called Resource Manager Web Interface, which will be provided as part of the certification, mostly bookmarking as part of your browser. Or as part of the problem statement, they will tell what is the resource manager IP address, and by default resource manager UI will be running on 8088 port number. So type that URL. In this case, it's rm01.itversity.com, and 8088 is the port number, and hit enter. Here, by looking at this information, vCores total as well as memory total, you can determine the capacity on the cluster. So it has 30 cores, which means 30 tasks can run simultaneously without any issues. And those 30 tasks can actually take up to 120 GB memory. Okay. And how much memory will be taken by each task and how many cores will be taken by each task will be determined by this minimum allocation and maximum allocation. By default, it takes 1 vCore and 1 GB RAM. So if I give 30 while launching Spark Shell or PySpark, it actually uses 30 GB memory, but from CPU perspective, it will saturate all the resources on the cluster. If I give 10 and if I give 2 GB memory, then it will take 20 GB memory and 20 vCores on the cluster. So number of cores multiplied by memory should not exceed 120 GB, and number of tasks should not exceed whatever number of vCores you are given. Have to be should divide this vCores, and you have to come up with the number. In this case, if you just give one vCore, you can give up to 30 executors simultaneously. If you give two vCores, you can give 15 executors simultaneously. If you give 20, you can only give 20 executors simultaneously, because if I give two vCores for each task, it will be 40 vCores. Sorry, two threads for each task. Then it will become 40, which will go beyond this capacity, and you can see some performance issue. So keeping these things in mind, you have to come up with the number of executors. But if you are not very comfortable with these numbers, with the stress because of the certification exam, make sure you understand how much resources are used by default, and try to use a bit more so that you can save some time by giving additional capacity to process the data. And how to get the defaults? If you are trying to use Python, you just run PySpark, and always remember that you have to say master yarn so that it use yarn on the cluster. Otherwise, it will run it locally and it can cause some issues. So make sure you add -- master yarn when you give in the certification. And also, if you are using the lab, make sure you give this additional variable. It is only specific to the lab. Don't worry too much about it at the time of certification. And give a 5-digit number between 10,000 and 65,535 and hit enter. It will give a tracking URL. Take the tracking URL and then open in the browser, and you can understand how much resources it is using on the cluster, and then you can customize a bit to use the cluster a bit efficiently. If you are confused with this, and if you don't want to give this, give a try at the time of certification, that is fine. You can just go ahead and give. I don't think it will cost you the exam, but as it is time sensitive, you might waste time unnecessarily without using the full cluster capacity. But when it comes to working on a project, you have to understand these things and you have to act accordingly. And now if you look at it, once the session is launched, a PySpark session or Spark Shell is launched, you can click on executors and see how many executors are created. That means only 2 threads will be running, and by default each thread will use 1 GB memory. Let's see whether it is specified here. Here it is not specified. As part of the environment, we are not getting the values. That means it is using defaults. So by default, it will use 1 GB memory, and 2 executors are created. So you are only using 2 GB capacity. And if you have to process 10 GB worth of data with 2 GB capacity at the time of certification, obviously it will take a lot more time. So you should know how to customize these things. And the way you can customize is something like this. If you are using Python, you just say PySpark here. And let's say I want to use 6 executors with 2 cores in each executor and 2 GB memory. I can just write the command like this. And now I can actually come out of the one which is launched with defaults and paste the new command. Take this tracking URL and paste it here. click on executors, and you can see there are 6 threads here. You can also check the environment variables. You can see there is a environment variable called Spark executor course, which is 2, Spark executor instances, which is 6, and Spark executor memory is 2 GB. So if you are trying to process 10 GB worth of data, now we are giving 6 executors capacity with 2 GB each, with 2 threads. So there are 12 threads which will be using 12 GB to process 10 GB worth of data. 12 threads with 12 GB will finish the job faster compared to 2 threads with 2 GB overall. So that is how you can fine tune the execution. Don't worry too much at the time of certification on this. Most likely the questions will not be or the solutions should not be very time consuming when it comes to execution, and probably they might take care of certain defaults to set to higher values. But in case if you're comfortable in extracting the information about your data set and cluster capacity, and if you want to override while launching the session, this is the way to go. And these are general guidelines. You can use this approach not only for Python as demonstrated, but also for Scala Spark shell. Only difference is, instead of saying PySpark here, you just say Spark shell. The rest of the stuff is same. And you can use it as part of the HDPCD certification, as well as CCS Spark and Hadoop developer certification, while executing or coming up with the problem statement. And also make sure you close the session after completing one question and relaunch it again, depending upon the resources you think should be given to the to process the data for a given problem statement, and then start coming up with the solution. It serves 2 purposes. One, you will be giving more number of resources or efficient utilization of the cluster. Second, if you are writing the code with the same variable names and all, the side effects of bugs and all will be taken care automatically. So if I have to give the certification, I will exit after one problem is solved, and I will launch a new session, and then I will start executing the code in that new session. But if while dealing with the certification, it's all up to you. Whatever is convenient should be given top priority than efficient execution of the cluster. So make sure you don't write the buggy code, and follow the approach which you are comfortable with. And these are the general guidelines for any Spark related question for CCS Spark and Hadoop developer certification or HDPCD certification. And also even for the other certifications for MapR or Databricks certifications, there might be few questions on these areas. So having knowledge of these things will definitely help.